What happens when a woman offers kindness in a house that runs on cruelty? It was an ordinary dawn until a hymn cut through the fog like a knife. What followed left the kitchen silent and the bell at the porch ringing into nothing. Eliza's morning began with fire that behaved itself. She knew the temper of coals like other people knew temper in kinfolk, which ember would take to the shovel without spitting, which might bite. She lifted the iron lid from the Dutch oven, leaned in, and coaxed heat alive with a wisp of breath. Cornmeal, salt, water. She stirred with a wooden spoon worn thin by other women's hands, women whose names no ledger bothered to keep. Her good act was small and defiant. She hid an extra spoon of molasses for an old man whose gums bled when he ate. She did it quickly, the way one slips a prayer between a curse and a whip crack. The old man's eyes watered. "The Lord sees," he rasped. Eliza shook her head. "So do you. Eat." From the big house came the triple clang of the porch bell. Breakfast for the Whites would be late if the kitchen did not move faster. Eliza moved. Pots hissed. Biscuits rose. Coffee boiled with the bitter certainty of taxes. Mary Ann, whose wrists were round as broom handles, lifted a tray and halted when a hymn drifted from the parlor. "Christ the Lord is risen today." The date on the calendar cut into Eliza then. Easter. She tasted ash. Around her, the kitchen kept working. Mary Ann's tray wobbled. "Hold it," Eliza said. "Keep your back straight. Don't let your hands tell them your fear." Mary Ann nodded, drew breath, and carried dignity into a room that punished it. Josiah's day began with a wet rope and a horse that had learned to pretend at pity. He saddled the white mare, the mistress's favorite, while the stable stank of hay and old iron. He was quick with animals. They read him the way a hungry man reads a table, thorough, grateful. He checked her hooves, rubbed her flank, then quietly loosened the buckles on the cruel bit the overseer liked, switching it for one kinder to the mouth. A good act, and a dangerous one. The mare nickered softly. "I see you," Josiah said. He did not look at the door because looking is what invites trouble to enter. Still, trouble entered. Overseer Brant's boots scraped on packed dirt. Mean rhythm, meaner breath. "You softening the mare." Brant's voice had the color of rust. "Ma'am asked she be gentle this morning," Josiah said, keeping his face flat, his words framed like plain fence posts. "Church day, that bit stays." Brant stepped in close. The horse flicked her ears back. "Lord loves a straight line." He made Josiah swap back. The mare rolled a dark eye. Brant's hands corrected the buckling with deliberate jerks, each one a liturgy of humiliation. Josiah took the lesson in silence. He did not add a word to the growing heap of words the overseer liked to keep around his feet like coals. When Brant left, Josiah leaned his forehead against the mare's neck. "Forgive me," he murmured to the animal. He meant other things. He meant Eliza's laugh in the kitchen when the flour dusted her cheek like winter. He meant the old man and his bleeding gums. He meant the bell that never stopped ringing. Mistress Caroline's day began with calculation disguised as piety. Her Bible lay opened at Corinthians, a ribbon marking charity, which she affected in public the way a fashionable woman affects a feathered hat. She watched her reflection as she adjusted a cameo at her throat. Tears came easily to her when visitors asked about the war that had taken her brother. Tears did not come when she signed away infants from mothers. That was commerce, and commerce did not warrant moisture. She had the cook send extra butter today for the table to indicate magnanimity. It was Easter. One must be seen to feel. She lifted the bell cord and yanked it with a practiced wrist. The kitchen would hurry. The enslaved legs would run. The music of power was bells making other people sweat. Eliza brought the biscuits herself because the mistress liked to remark on the neatness of her hands. "Such pretty hands for kitchen work," Caroline observed. "The way one might discuss a vase or a horse's mane." "Keep them that way, Eliza. God honors diligence." Eliza placed the biscuits on the lace and thought of God as he was taught in a yard sermon last summer. A God who parted seas but left chains intact, who turned water to wine but not property to people. She said yes, ma'am, because the room demanded yes as stiffly as it demanded silver. She did not bow her head long. She had dough in her fingernails, and prayers kept seizing there, unable to rise. In the yard the wind sharpened. Easter morning should have been soft. This one bit. Clouds moved like a slow herd. After breakfast, Caroline insisted on a reading by the parlor window. Her voice smooth as butter, she did not churn. "Love suffereth long, and is kind," she recited, while Eliza and Mary Ann stood by the door with towels, waiting to be dismissed. The word suffereth snagged Eliza's ear. It made her stomach clench and then unclench, like a hand around a hot handle. She had suffered long. The suffering had manners. It said ma'am, and looked at the floor. The first rupture came swift, as most do when order is a thin coat of paint over rot. A rider from the neighboring plantation arrived panting pride. In the kitchen, Eliza heard only the pieces. Found, regulators, run, example. The men collected into a knot on the porch, their words hard as buckshot. Caroline put a hand to her throat in a gesture that was part shock, part theater. Brant grinned without showing teeth. Eliza stepped outside to fetch kindling, and saw the rider's coat spattered with mud up to the thigh. The horse's flanks heaved. The rider drank, wiped his mouth with his sleeve, and said louder, for the servants to hear, "They caught that troublemaker at Ransom's place." Laughter made him sing before sunrise. The words went through Eliza. Ransom's place held her cousin Ruth. Trouble bled across property lines. Eliza returned to the kitchen, put the kindling down, and stirred a pot that did not need stirring. The spoon cut wake through brown gravy like a slow boat. She looked at Marianne. "You keep the old man's spoon ready?" Marianne nodded. "And the little molasses?" "Good." Then the second rupture. Josiah came at a run with a hand at his side, his shirt ripped near the ribs. Blood, bright and shocking as spilled berries, soaked the cotton. "Bramble tore me," he said, lying by habit. He had been corrected with the short lash used for horse thieves and insolent grooms. Brant's work again. Eliza pressed a cloth to the wound, her fingers quick, her breath slower so he would match it. "Hold," she said. Josiah did. The kitchen crowded in. Marianne, a boy named Solomon, the old man shuffling with his tin cup. They made a shelter of bodies against eyes that would read care as rebellion. "Do not drip on the pine," Solomon whispered, absurd instruction that carried the heavy humor the enslaved used to keep from crying. Josiah managed a crooked smile. "Wouldn't dream of staining the sacred floor," Eliza hissed. "Quiet." She wrapped the wound in a strip torn from the hem of her own dress. There would be questions about that later. She would answer with silence. Mistress Caroline entered without knocking. She paused at the sight of Eliza's hands on Josiah's bare skin. The pause iced the room. "What is this?" she asked softly, which was worse than the alternative. "He fell," Eliza said. "We tend him." "On Easter morning," Caroline murmured, gaze moving from cloth to skin to Eliza's face. "I'd be careful of the company you keep near holy days, Eliza. God sees who reaches for whom." The dagger there was meant to slice two throats with one flick. Dignity, then love. "God sees," Eliza replied, voice even as iron cooling. She lowered her eyes, which satisfied the rules without surrendering the truth behind them. Caroline left a hint of perfume and a long shadow. "Put him to stable," she told Brant at the door. "Keep him out of sight while we have guests. Men lose appetite at the sight of blood that is not in their wars." Brant dragged Josiah up by the arm. Josiah bit the inside of his cheek until the taste changed. He did not look at Eliza as he was hauled away because looking is an oath, and oaths get stolen. Rain came thin as knife edges. The Easter sky wore gray like morning. Lunch service doubled, trebled, became its own war. Eliza moved through heat and scold and pot steam. A dish cracked in her hand when a guest laughed about a man whipped for stealing a hymn book. "He can keep the words now," the guest said, smiling. Sarcasm, like salt, found every wound. In the stable, Josiah worked because work was both punishment and proof of worth in a world that hated both. Brant leaned in the doorway. "You got a quick hand for horses," he observed. "Shame your hands wander." "My hands are on the job you said," Josiah said. Brant spat. It landed near a barrel of oats, not quite on the toe of Josiah's boot. "Watch your tone. Boy with a mouth gets a buyer." The threat had teeth. Sale was the guillotine that never needed sharpening. Mistress Caroline visited the quarters before evening prayers like a queen inspecting a village. She brought a basket of stale loaves and a verse ready to perform. The rain had thickened to a slow soak that crawled under clothes and into bones. People gathered because gathering is how one keeps proof of personhood. Eliza stood near the door, the hem of her dress frayed where bandage had come from. The old man clutched his tin cup and looked for his extra sweetness like a child looks for his mother. Caroline gave her speech. "You are blessed to be in a Christian home," she said. "Even when the world storms, remember we offer shelter." The quarters wore shelter like an accusation. Wind pushed through chinks. A child coughed. Eliza watched the mistress's hand rest on the head of a little girl as if that conferral erased the ledger entry that would one day sell the girl away. "Sing," Caroline said, and they sang. It was safer to harmonize than to argue. After Caroline left, Brant lingered like smoke. He eyed the men as if pricing them in his head. He stopped by Eliza, and with a smirk that held the memory of her tending Josiah, said, "A cook should mind her pots, not her stable." He reached and pinched the torn hem of her dress between two fingers, lifted it an inch, then let it drop. "Careful where you spend your cloth." Eliza looked at him straight. "Careful where you spend your eyes," she answered. quiet as a knife unsheathed under a table. Solomon stifled a laugh that could have cost him teeth. Brant's jaw tightened. He left a promise behind him like a stain. Night swung down sudden. Rain slowed, then stopped, giving the mud just enough time to arrange itself as a trap. The big house glowed with lamplight, windows bright as accusations. Eliza returned to the kitchen to bank the hearths, to tidy, to make tomorrow think today had never happened. She found the ledger open on the sideboard where the mistress sometimes left it to be read by those forbidden to read. Names marched down the page like prisoners. Beside Josiah's, a pencil mark she had not seen before. A small X, harmless as a fly, until one considers what flies announce. She closed the ledger gently, as one might close the eyes of someone not yet dead. She did not say a word. Words tonight were flint. The old man came in for his cup. She poured the last of the molasses for him in full view of the room, because hiding wears a body out. He tasted the sweetness and smiled with 2 teeth. "The Lord sees," he said again. Eliza washed her hands at the pump in the yard. The water had the cold bite of creek stones. She scrubbed until the dough smell left her skin, and only iron and ash remained. A whip cracked somewhere out by the sheds. No one cried out. The body learns to hold its voice like breath under water. Wind stirred the tree line. Frogs spoke in the ditch. The night smelled of wet soil and the faint sour ghost of lye. Back in the stable, Josiah lay on the straw, not sleeping, not able to stop the memory of Brant's hand at the buckle of the cruel bit. He thought, because the mind must move or die. He counted boards. He listened to the mare's breath slow into a willing rhythm. He watched the dark, as if the dark might tell him what the morning would demand. He did not pray. He conserved everything that could be spent. Mistress Caroline knelt by her bed with her Bible open again. She spoke aloud. Order is the first gift of God. She traced the cameo at her throat, thought of the rider's story from Ransom's place, thought of fear like mildew, that creeping thing that rots a house from within, if not scrubbed with proper vigor. She made a note to speak to her husband about firm measures. On Easter, she murmured to herself, a mixture of dismay and thrilling righteousness, the devil always tests the faithful. Eliza curled on her pallet with the old man's empty tin mug beside her, because he had pressed it into her hand in gratitude, and she had not yet found the heart to give it back. The roof dripped. Mary Ann whispered a half hymn and let it rot into quiet. Solomon muttered curses in his sleep, creative ones that would have made a sailor proud. Eliza watched the seam where wall met roof, and remembered the extra spoon of sweetness, Josiah's blood, Caroline's hand on the child's head, Brant's finger and thumb on her torn hem. She breathed slowly so the air would not hear her shaking. In the morning, they would light the fires again. Tonight every ember held still as a held tongue. What happens when a wound is dressed but never heals? It was supposed to be a day of hymns, but by sundown it was only a ledger of pain, and what followed made the earth itself hold its breath. The rain left the yard soft, and the mud clung to Eliza's ankles when she carried the wash to the line. The white sheets ballooned in the wind, holy as church banners to anyone passing by. To her they were shrouds. She pegged them fast, eyes stinging from smoke that wasn't there. Each sheet pulled her mind back to the stable, where Josiah's blood had darkened the straw. She smelled it still, iron, damp hay, horse sweat. She had pressed her cloth into the wound, torn from her own hem, and Brant had taken him anyway. In the quarters, Mary Ann moved with a limp, punishment from 2 nights past when she spilled cider on a guest's boots. The lash hadn't broken skin, but the welt bent her like a cane in wind. Solomon tried to joke about it. "Least they didn't take your tongue," he muttered, but his eyes showed no laughter, only hollow rage. The old man with his tin cup sat on the steps, waiting for Eliza's quiet rebellion. She poured a spoon of molasses into his portion without flinch, though the kitchen was crowded with eyes that watched for treason. "The Lord sees," he whispered again, and this time she answered, "So does the earth." Her voice carried a stone in it, heavy, rolling. Josiah spent the morning in the stable, shirt stiff with dried blood. The mare nuzzled his shoulder, soft, as if apologizing for the cruelty of men. Brant had ordered him to scrape manure with the injured side, a command sharpened by cruelty's edge. He did it slow, because slow was safer than defiance, yet every scrape of the shovel was a sermon. His ribs screamed, but silence kept him upright. When he paused, he remembered Eliza's hand pressed firm to his wound, her voice steady, commanding breath into him like she was commanding life itself. He thought of her more than he thought of God. God had been absent in whips, in chains, in sails. But Eliza was present, her small acts a gospel written in flesh and risk. Mistress Caroline strutted through the quarters before noon, with a psalm on her lips. She held her Bible high, but the leather binding smelled of perfumed oil, not sweat. She spoke to the gathered with the tone of one rehearsing for an audience. He who suffers with patience shall reap eternal reward. Eliza stared at the woman's white gloves, gloves that had never scrubbed a floor, never touched raw skin, never blistered in sun. The words, meant to console, sank like stones in water. Not one face lit with hope, not one heart eased. Caroline didn't notice. She smiled and turned back toward the big house, skirts brushing mud she would never clean. The afternoon carried more violence, dressed as order. A boy of 12 was dragged by his ear to the yard for stealing a biscuit. His crime was hunger. Brant struck him with the flat of the whip, not to break bone, just to bruise, to remind him who owned his belly. Eliza stood at the edge of the crowd, jaw tight, nails biting into her palm. She did not speak, not yet. Later, as the kitchen fire dimmed, she washed the blood-stained rag she had torn for Josiah. Each rinse darkened the water. She pressed it flat against the table and stared at it until her breath evened. A garment once whole, now ruined, yet more useful ruined than whole. That thought clung to her. Night fell with no hymns. The Easter moon hung swollen, red at the rim. In the quarters, the air was heavy with whispers. Mary Ann prayed aloud for her limp to ease. Solomon cursed under his breath, weaving sarcasm with pain. Maybe the Lord will send us manna. Maybe it'll fall right into the overseer's mouth and choke him. The old man wheezed a laugh that turned into a cough. Eliza sat apart, the tin cup still beside her, her hands raw from lye. She thought of the ledger she had seen open, Josiah's name marked with a cross. She thought of the mistress's warning, of Brant's fingers pinching her hem, of the child's bruised face. Each memory pressed on her like coals banked in ash, quiet now, but waiting for breath. She did not speak of what she would do. She only listened to the rain still dripping from the eaves, steady as a drumbeat. The night wrapped itself tight, and the quarters sank into uneasy sleep. Eliza lay awake, eyes fixed on the dark seam of the roof. She held no prayer on her lips, only silence that sharpened itself into something harder. What happens when a promise of mercy becomes a blade? It was a day meant for commerce, but it ended as a wound carved in flesh, and what followed left silence heavier than chains. The morning broke clear, the kind of Easter dawn the mistress loved to praise from her porch, pretending it was a blessing for her house alone. But Eliza saw no blessing in it. She saw hard light on damp ground, showing every footprint like scripture written in mud. She carried bread to the ovens, while the White family dressed for church. Josiah had not returned to the quarters. His place on the pallet lay flat, straw scattered where his body should have been. Mary Ann whispered, "They've put him in the books." Her limp slowed her speech, but the words cut quick. Eliza said nothing, only pressed the dough harder with her fists. The bread rose because it had to. In the stable, Josiah worked with the mare again, though each breath hurt his ribs. Brant circled him like a crow over carrion. "You're marked for the block," he said plainly, tossing a rope onto the hay. "Next auction you'll fetch a fair price, even beat up. Might send you down river. They like men with backs there, not mouths." Josiah's jaw tightened. He kept his hands steady on the bridle, though his chest burned. "I serve here," he said. "You serve where I tell you." Brant's grin split his face. "And when you're gone, that cook girl will learn to mind her eyes." The words struck harder than any whip. Josiah's knuckles whitened. He wanted to strike, to end Brant where he stood, but the mare shifted, sensing his rage. He swallowed it whole. Mistress Caroline rode to church in her carriage, Bible clasped like a shield. The enslaved filed behind, walking the rutted road in silence. Eliza walked among them, skirt hem still frayed from the bandage she had torn. She held her head high enough to see the steeple rising against the sky. Inside, the sermon blistered with hypocrisy. The preacher thundered of obedience, of servants knowing their place, of masters as shepherds. The congregation nodded, as if God had written chains into creation. Eliza listened, her face still. Each word salted her wound. Josiah stood outside, barred from the pews, holding the mare's reins. His side throbbed. From the doorway he heard the hymn, Rock of Ages. The irony curdled his stomach. Rock of Ages for them, Iron of Ages for him. After service, the mistress entertained guests at the house. Wine poured, roast set, laughter rose. Eliza served in silence, her hands precise, her steps controlled. She moved like a shadow, but her ears took in everything. She heard talk of a sale in Richmond. She heard Brant mention Josiah's name, his voice casual, like naming a calf for slaughter. She saw Caroline nod, her lips pursed in mock regret. "He will bring good coin," she said. The tray in Eliza's hands trembled. She gripped it harder until her fingers ached. That night the quarters burned with whispers. Solomon cursed the hypocrisy of the day. Mary Ann wept quietly, her limp swelling worse. The old man sipped from his tin cup, his eyes foggy with pain. Eliza sat apart, her body taut. She did not speak of the sale, though the others sensed it. Josiah entered late, shoulders heavy, ribs stiff. He lowered himself beside her. The room hushed. "They'll sell me," he said flatly. His voice had no tremor, no plea, just truth laid bare. Mary Ann gasped. Solomon spat. The old man muttered, "The Lord sees." Eliza turned to Josiah. "When?" "Soon," he answered. "Before spring ends." The silence that followed was thick as tar. Each soul in the room felt it, loss already shaping itself, grief preparing its chains. Mistress Caroline retired to her chamber, smug from wine. She removed her gloves, folded them neatly, and opened the ledger. Her pencil drew an X beside Josiah's name. She did not hesitate. To her it was arithmetic, nothing more. In the quarters, Eliza stared at the rafters, her fists tight around the old man's empty cup. Sleep would not come. Her chest carried too many voices: Josiah's flat tone, Caroline's false piety, Brant's sneer. She shut her eyes and saw not peace, but fire licking at the edges of her thoughts. The Easter moon glowed cold outside. Somewhere in the night, a whip cracked again. The sound did not startle her anymore. It only sharpened her silence into steel. What happens when freedom is offered with one hand and stolen with the other? It was a night meant for rest, but it turned into a graveyard of promises, and what followed carved despair into the marrow of every bone. The sky was bruised purple when the rumor spread through the quarters. Mistress Caroline had spoken of manumission, a word carried like smoke, sweet and dangerous. Mary Ann's limp quickened. Solomon's curses turned to laughter. Even the old man lifted his tin cup as if salvation might drip into it. They whispered of papers, of signatures, of walking free down the road without chains. Eliza listened, silent. She had seen too many ledgers, too many X's, too many sales disguised as mercy. Yet when Josiah returned from the stable, blood still stiff on his shirt, and repeated the mistress's words, "Serve well and freedom might come," Eliza's breath caught. Might. The word was a noose braided with silk. That night she lay awake, fingers pressed against the torn hem of her dress. She remembered the mistress's eyes, how they gleamed when she spoke of God's charity. She remembered Brant's smirk, his promise that Josiah would not stay. Hope and dread twisted in her chest until sleep refused her. Morning broke brittle. Josiah was ordered to the fields despite his ribs. Each swing of the hoe ripped his side, but he did not cry out. Brant watched from horseback, whip dangling like a sermon. "Strong back still," he muttered, "worth good silver." Eliza carried water to the workers. When she reached Josiah, their eyes met. He whispered, "Hold steady. We'll outlast them." But the blood on his shirt told another story. Mistress Caroline gathered the enslaved in the yard at sundown. She held her Bible, pages worn from performance, not prayer. "The Lord rewards obedience," she said. "Some among you may taste freedom if you prove faithful." Gasps rippled the crowd. Some fell to their knees. Others lifted trembling hands skyward. Eliza stayed standing. She saw the ledger in Caroline's study, the pencil poised like a blade. Freedom was not a gift here. It was a coin tossed to keep the desperate docile. Josiah believed. His shoulders straightened. His eyes brightened with something Eliza had not seen since before the lash tore him. He whispered to her after, "Maybe it's true. Maybe this Easter brings more than sorrow." Her silence stung him, but she could not echo a lie. The next day the auctioneer arrived, thin, sharp, smelling of ink and sweat. He inspected Josiah in the stable, prodding ribs, measuring arms, clicking his tongue. Brant stood nearby, smug as a spider. Eliza, carrying laundry passed, heard the numbers whispered. She froze, linen clutched to her chest. "Fine price," the auctioneer said. "Even injured. Paperwork's ready," Brant replied. Eliza's vision blurred. She stumbled back into the yard, the sound of coins clinking in her ears. The promise of freedom was smoke. The sale was fire. That night the quarters sank into mourning before the loss had even come. Mary Ann wept openly. Solomon punched the wall until his knuckles split. The old man croaked, "The Lord sees," but his voice cracked. Josiah sat apart, hands shaking though his face was still. Eliza approached. "You cannot believe them now," she said, her voice low, sharp. He met her eyes. "I wanted to. That want will kill you," she answered. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it, though the heat of his touch was threaded with despair. Mistress Caroline wrote in her ledger by lamplight. She hummed a hymn, her pen scratching across names. To her, freedom was never real. It was leverage. She had dangled it before Josiah like fruit before a starving man, and now she would sell him as easily as she plucked that fruit away. In the stable, Brant tied the cruel bit back onto the mare, laughing under his breath. Tomorrow, he said to himself. Tomorrow he's gone. And in the quarters, Eliza sat in the dark, her fists tight around the old man's cup. The weight of betrayal pressed into her bones. Her silence no longer felt like survival. It felt like fire smothered under ash, waiting for air. What happens when the body breaks but the spirit refuses? It was a day meant for departure, but it became a reckoning, and what followed turned the master's house into tinder. The sun rose hard and white. The auction wagon waited by the gates, iron wheels sunk in mud. Josiah was led from the stable in chains, ribs bound with rope to keep him upright. Brant rode beside him, whip coiled at his thigh, smug as if escorting a prize stallion. Mistress Caroline stood on the porch, Bible open, lips moving in silent prayer that reeked of performance. The quarters gathered at a distance. Mary Ann clung to her shawl. Solomon muttered curses. The old man lifted his cup with trembling hands. Eliza did not move. She watched Josiah's steps drag through the mud, watched Brant's smirk widen, watched Caroline's eyes gleam. Then Josiah stumbled. The crowd gasped. Brant struck him across the shoulders. Josiah fell to his knees. Eliza's chest locked. She felt the air leave her, felt her fists tighten, felt the silence in her throat twist into something jagged. She stepped forward. The mistress saw her first. Back, Caroline snapped. This man is no longer yours to look upon. Eliza did not stop. She bent, lifted Josiah's arm, steadied him. His breath rattled, his face pale. He looked at her and managed a broken smile. Hold steady, he whispered again, though his body sagged like a felled tree. Brant raised his whip. Get away. The crack split the yard. Eliza did not flinch. She stared straight at him, eyes black fire. For the first time, Brant's hand hesitated. The yard hushed. Even the birds fell silent. That night, Josiah was gone. Sold before the moon rose. Carted down the road like cargo. The quarters sat in stunned quiet. Mary Ann sobbed until her voice frayed. Solomon struck the wall again and again. The old man whispered his worn prayer. Eliza sat apart, her back rigid, her hands wrapped around the cup. Her eyes burned but no tears fell. She heard the wagon wheels still in her skull, the sound of Josiah's chains clinking away from her. Caroline's promise of freedom was revealed as a lie carved deep. Brant's smirk, the whip, the ledger, all of it fused into one truth. The system did not falter, it devoured. By dawn, Eliza's body ached from sleeplessness, but her silence had hardened. She moved through the kitchen as if nothing had shifted, kneading dough, stoking coals, ladling grits. Yet every act carried weight. Every pot stirred was a thought sharpened. Every ember coaxed a reminder. The mistress entered, humming a hymn, speaking of the Lord's mercy. She touched Eliza's shoulder as if blessing her. Eliza did not move, but inside something cracked like dry wood catching flame. She saw it clearly then. The house was not stone, not sacred. It was wood and oil and cloth. It could burn. That night, the quarters heard only the rain drip. Mary Ann prayed. Solomon cursed. The old man coughed blood into his tin cup. Eliza lay awake, eyes fixed on the rafters. Her hands still smelled of smoke from the kitchen, smoke that clung to her skin no matter how much she scrubbed. The silence around her was no longer a cage. It was kindling. And in her chest, where grief had sat heavy, fire began to stir. What happens when silence finds its voice? It was meant to be another night of hymns and obedience, but it ended with smoke that no prayer could cover. The air on Easter night was thick, wet with the day's rain, heavy with wood smoke from the kitchen hearth. Eliza moved through it with steady hands, ladling stew, laying bread, pouring cider. To anyone watching, she was the same dutiful cook she had always been. But her eyes were elsewhere, on the rafters, on the oil lamps, on the dry curtains brushing the floor. Mistress Caroline sat in the parlor. Guests gathered around her. She read aloud from Scripture, voice smooth as honey, turned rancid. Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves. The words slithered through the room. Eliza heard them from the doorway, jaw clenched, spoon tight in her grip. Brant leaned against the wall, whip coiled, eyes on her. His smirk said he still tasted the power of selling Josiah away. Every glance was a taunt, every breath a threat. Eliza bowed her head, turned and returned to the kitchen. The coals glowed red in the hearth. She added wood. Flame leapt high. The quarters that night were restless. Mary Ann prayed aloud, begging God to soften the mistress's heart. Solomon spat into the dirt. God ain't listening here, he growled. The old man sipped from his cup, eyes glassy, whispering, the Lord sees. Eliza said nothing. She sat by the doorway, hands folded, face still. Inside, her silence roared. She remembered Josiah's last words, "Hold steady." She remembered the ledger's mark. She remembered Brant's whip and Caroline's lie of freedom. Her breath came slow, even. Her heart beat like drums before a march. Midnight crept in. The big house slept, its windows glowing faint with lamplight. Eliza rose from her pallet without sound. She crossed the yard barefoot, skirts damp with dew. In the kitchen, the fire still breathed. She fed it more wood, more cloth, more oil. Flames licked higher, orange tongues whispering against iron pots. She took the mistress's drapes, pulled them close to the hearth. They caught fast. The fire swelled, greedy, loud now. Eliza stood before it, face lit red, heat blistering her skin. When the blaze leapt to the rafters, she did not move. The house woke in chaos. Caroline's screams pierced the smoke, shrill hymns broken into terror. Brant shouted orders, boots pounding, whip useless against fire. Guests stumbled, choking, clawing for the doors. Eliza stepped into the yard, flames at her back. The enslaved poured from the quarters, eyes wide, faces lit by the inferno. Marianne limped forward, clutching her shawl. Solomon laughed bitter, wild, the sound cracked like thunder. The old man raised his cup as sparks rained down. Caroline staggered onto the porch, hair wild, Bible clutched still in her hand. She shrieked, "Devil's work!" The fire roared in answer, swallowing her words. Eliza stood in the center of the yard, straight and unflinching. She did not run. She did not hide. The flames behind her rose higher, devouring the walls, shattering glass, splitting beams. The house that had ruled every breath, now bent and broke in the grip of fire. Brant rushed at her, whip raised. The roof groaned, then collapsed in a thunder of sparks and timber. He froze, eyes wide, swallowed by smoke. Eliza did not flinch.